In this first edition of the Decision Intelligence Laboratory podcast, we're going to look at project risk assessment. Our guest is Irv Lustig, who's done just about everything in the world of data science, optimization, artificial intelligence, ranging from cutting-edge algorithmic research to product management and strategic and technical consulting. He'll tell us about the Princeton 20, a framework for assessing project risk and for guiding teams to deliver successful outcomes.
You're going to create this set of tools that they're going to use to start making decisions. And are they ready to handle the change that's going to be involved in the business processes due to this new system being in place? So there's a lot of tool selling and that goes on without people recognizing that in general, the tool is a means to an end. Avoid the way we're taught in school, frankly, which is go out, look at the problem, build a huge model, get all your data, walk away for 4 months and come back later. That just doesn't work.
I'm co-host Vijay, Mehrotra, and with me is my co-host Michael Watson. Today's guest is Irv Lustig, and it's a real pleasure for me to welcome Irv to the program. I've known Irv since we were graduate students 2 or 3 years ago. No, I'm kidding. It's been a little bit longer than that. Irv's had a really kind of a fascinating career. He's done really cutting-edge research around optimization and optimization solvers. He's been involved with the C-Plex engine, but then has also played a variety of roles up to including product management, sales, and marketing around optimization and data science technologies. He's currently with Princeton Consultants, and we're really grateful that he's taken some time to be here with us. On the note of Princeton Consultants, our primary topic today is something called the Princeton 20. And Irv, could you give us an introduction to the Princeton 20?
Sure. So this was something that we created maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It actually was created by Steve Sashihara, our CEO, as a framework to identify some success and risk factors for the deployment of AI. We started off talking about it from the deployment of optimization, and then we realized that the same issues come up when you're dealing with AI, broadly speaking. I mean, this is pre-Gen AI and what have you, but it still applies. And we divided it into 2 sections. One is first environmental factors, things that are typically within the business environment that will affect things you need to look at in terms of being able to be successful, what risks are identified, and then 10 technical factors. So we use it as a way of understanding what are the issues that represent risk in a project to us if we're going forward and trying to sell or start a project, to make sure we're ahead of the game in addressing these risks, as opposed to waiting for stuff to happen downstream as we're further into the project. So I can go into each one of the 20 as we have the 10 environmental factors and the 10 technical factors. I can go over the list of them, or we can talk about specific ones, kind of see how you'd like to evolve this, Vijay and Mike.
Well, let me ask a bigger picture question, or like what's been your experience using this with clients in terms of the success rate of projects? I assume you guys built this to make your project, you do large scale projects to make them more successful. So what's been your sort of track record with this? How has it helped, and how's it facilitated good delivery?
So it actually is one really useful way we've used it is as a sales tool. So if we're in a situation where we're trying to sell someone on a project and sell our capabilities, we can try to upfront identify and evaluate all these factors, and we put it together in a spreadsheet and look at each one. And so for each one of the factors, I basically give a score of either +1, a 0, or a -1. So if it's a -1, it means everything looks good. We don't have to worry about it. A 0 means there's room for improvement, and a +1 means that this is a risk. And then we have to think of what are the ways we're going to mitigate those risks. So from the perspective of sales, we've had hopefully a lot of conversations with the client. We understand the environment, both from the business side and the technical side. And then what we're looking to do is to come up with our own evaluation of each one, scoring each one of the 20 factors. And then in sales, we're able to say, here's the Princeton 20. We, give them the list, and we focus on the areas where we believe there to be the most risk and say, look, for each of these areas, whether you pick us or you pick somebody else, you're going to have to address those risks. And we're going to make that part of our project, because if we don't, it's more likely for failure. So we use it there as a sales tool. If we've gotten past the sales and say we haven't done that evaluation, we're doing it early on in the project, then it's the same thing. We're using it as a way to be upfront and know where we believe the risks to be. And so that as part of the project plan, we'll make sure that we have a plan to address each one of those risks to ensure success.
Imagine when you say use it as a sales tool, you use it in two ways. One is to give the client comfort that you're going to be watching out to make sure you have a process in place to look for risk. And second, to help you scope the project. Is that a right way to think about it when you're scoping?
That's exactly fair. Yeah. So, I mean, we use it, in the client-facing way to basically score each of the factors for every project or opportunity and make sure that we have a explicit mitigation strategy that we plan with and as part of our project plan. And then we also use it internally. So we can try to, in creating teams that work on projects, we'll try to say, let's figure out, make sure that we've got people on the team that can address any of the risks. We also look at, when we do our performance reviews of our staff, when they were involved in the project, how well did they handle and get in any of these risks? We also, after a project is all said and done and we've done our delivery, let's see, how well did we address these risk factors? Did we potentially find new things that were not in our list of 20, or maybe they categorized it, but we said, this thing looked okay, but in reality, we missed the evaluation off the top because of how the project evolved. And then it gives us some lesson learned so that we have these stories, and it helps us as a firm become better over time by, learning from experience.
So I could definitely see a lot of ways, just like you've articulated, that it's really valuable for Princeton. Do you get a sense from your clients that they get value from it? What kinds of things are you hearing from them?
It's mostly that they appreciate the fact that we've addressed the risks right up front. I'm not sure if we've applied it so we do some strategic consulting. So it's not a project where we're delivering a deliverable, but more trying to help firms themselves become better at managing their own projects. And I personally am not aware of one where we've said, hey, we have this technique. You can go and use this internally to evaluate your own projects. But I've socialized it with other colleagues in the Informs community, and they said, wow, I really want to start using this tool and understanding it. And, we've written about it. We've blogged about it on our website. Steve did a webinar a few years ago as part of the Informs sponsored webinar series. So the material is out there, but generally, I think what the biggest thing clients appreciate is that we're being very upfront of knowing where we believe the risks to be, as opposed to, fighting the fire downstream and later in the project.
Mike, let me just take us sideways for a second, because
Yep.
Irv has sort of teed me up for this. Is it your sense that generally with optimization, data science, AI type of projects, that there's a lot of overselling of projects and products?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the issues that we have is that we've got this toolbox, whether it's coming from the OR backgrounds, like in optimization and simulation or other tools, and now you add, machine learning and Gen AI, and they're all hammers looking for nails, right? And the thing is you have to find the right nail so that you pull out the right tool to use and to solve the problem. So there's a lot of tool selling and that goes on without people recognizing that in general, the tool is a means to an end. You have to go through and make sure, and here I will reference the Informs, which will now be called the Informs Analytics Framework, which is going to be, I worked on a committee last year. We spent probably 80 hours of meetings coming up with the new basis for the Informs Certified Analytics Professional exam, but it's also a framework for doing projects, and it has 7 domains. It's based on a job task analysis that was done 12 years ago. The domains are the same, which start off with business problem framing, followed by analytics problem framing, then data, then choosing a methodology, implementing a solution, going into deployment, and finally lifecycle management. And so all of those issues have to be there. And for the folks that are coming more from a OR background, or you're trained as a data scientist and you can, make things like TensorFlow sing or do great things with Gen AI, that's all wonderful, right? But that means you're handling like the data and the methodology selection and the implementation, but you're not worried about those issues on the outside, which are you solving a problem that's going to deliver value? And at the end of the day, that's what matters. You have to make sure you identify the right problem to solve that is going to deliver value to, in our case, our customers, our clients. But if you're working in an internal organization, to your internal stakeholders. And I think a lot of people miss that. And that's kind of why, again, when we having these factors develop into the two categories of environmental, which is about the business side of it, is thinking about, how you're going to start it off. And then if you build a solution, what is it going to look like in the context of the business? And then the middle stuff is the things that are technical. What solution methodologies you're going to pick, can you score it, what tools you have, is speed a concern, user interface, etc.
Yeah, let's dive in and talk about one. So environmental 5 was decision scope. And in the write-up of decision scope, you kind of talk about you're looking for, did the client define something too narrow or too broad? Can you expand on that a little bit and give some examples?
Well, so this is generally about how do you know what is going to be a decision and its scope of impact on the entire business operations, and also the aspect of time, right? So one aspect that's interesting in the time domain is in scheduling problems. A lot of people think, and it comes from the academic community, like, okay, I have a bunch of tasks scheduled, they're competing for a variety of resources, and I've got to come up with a schedule that minimizes make span. But in scheduling, what usually happens is there's a schedule that already exists, and people are executing towards that schedule, and stuff happens. And so now you have to take the existing schedule and modify it in some way to deal with what you think is going to happen in the future. The distant future, the midterm future, the near-term future. Well, that's all relative to decision scope. Is the decision you're making today, how long is that decision going to be implemented for? What is the effect of, is it something that is going to be changing a whole bunch of operations that are in the company? Or is it very, crisp and well-defined that we know if we change the way we're making decisions here, that it doesn't have this, it may have trickle-down effects, but it doesn't mean that we have to start changing decisions elsewhere. And that's the kinds of things that we're worried about in those cases.
Okay, so as an example of that, if I'm the client and you come, I say, I want you to reschedule this, I've got this workforce scheduling, I want you to reschedule everything. And I think I just want, clean sheet, you reschedule everything, you start asking questions, you realize like, I can only really reschedule in the margins. That would be me coming in with being too broad, right? Just saying like
exactly. In fact, we had a client where we did use this, and if I recall correctly, I think this is one of the, we had it kind of in the middle of how we evaluated this with them. But they started off in saying they have basically a schedule that is looks the same. At least that's what they told us at the time. It turns out not to be true, but it's pretty much they create schedules that are the same in 3 days a week, like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday pattern. So okay. The schedule looks the same that's what they told us each day. And they wanted a system, which we built, to create that regular ongoing schedule. But it turns out that, and that's what, when they came and they wrote an RFP, that's how they came to us and our competitors with this. And it turned out that as we dug into more, we said, well, hold on a second. If we go in and we create a new weekly schedule, and these are for patient treatments that are happening in clinics, that means you're going to be calling all these patients and telling them you have different times to come in. And some of these patients have been having that same schedule of a 9 o'clock appointment for years. So you're not going to easily call 40 patients and tell them they all have new appointments because they're going to be kind of upset about it.
Right.
So we then said, your real problem is, how do you take your current schedule and modify it so it's more efficient and uses your resources better, but reduces the pain of having to reschedule the patients? So we can use this evaluation of the scope to make sure that they understand how a solution is going to work in the context of a business. We had another client that was also in the scheduling area and had a very similar thing. They were doing an annual schedule. So they have a bunch of tasks that they have to execute in the following year. They compute these schedules in the October-November timeframe. But they said, well, yeah, but we also know that as we get into the new year, some of the tasks we've been doing in the current year are going to carry over. Okay, that's fine. So we can accommodate that. But then it turned out that they said, well, one of our problems is that when we get into the course of the year, stuff happens, and what we thought is going to take 5 weeks is going to take 6 weeks, which eats up the resource longer. So then we talked about that they have a planning problem of planning of their schedule, as well as a operational scheduling problem, which is what they used to do is every week they would send a whole bunch of messages via Microsoft Teams or Slack, whatever they were using as their tool. And now we said, okay, you're going to create a process that every Friday you're going to run this new application we build, and it's going to know what the current schedule is. It's going to know what parts can be modified, and it's going to and you're going to collect all this information, however you want to collect it is your business. But when the information comes in, you get it into the system, and we will create a new schedule. So, we always look at, in scheduling, I like to talk about the cadence of scheduling. When are you making decisions? How long is that decision going to remain in place? And when will you have to potentially revise the decision? And that's where decision scope falls in.
Excellent. And that was super helpful, that explanation, because I was, I guess, struggling to differentiate decision scope from value proposition. Can you talk about the value proposition E7?
For sure. So in value proposition, what we're looking for there is to understand how will we know what is the value of this solution. And value can typically measure in two ways, right? One is that you're going to be saving money, right? You're minimizing costs or maximizing revenue, maximizing profit, doing something like that. The other way is that you're able to make a decision faster than you used to. So you can go into places where somebody's making scheduling decisions, it takes them a week to work in a spreadsheet and do something, and now you can present something that can create a solution in 5 minutes. That's changing the way they're going to work. So understanding those two components of value of, hey, you're going to get something that is valuable, hopefully measurable in a dollar aspect. And the other part is it measurable in terms of you're saving time in terms of decisions. What we try to do as part of evaluating that particular risk is to say, do we understand right off the bat what the value of a potential solution is? If you can imagine what the solution is, what will be the value? Is it, or maybe you kind of understand it, but maybe it's hard to quantify. Is it measurable? And then sometimes it's in scope to figure out what the actual value proposition is. So we did work for a client, I think this was about 6, 7 years ago, somewhere in that range, where we got a call from their new CFO who had actually worked with us at another firm. And he recognized that a problem they had was optimization. It was about scheduling or routing some workers through some tasks. And when we finally, we started talking to them and understood what the actual business operations were, we said, you don't really understand how much value you may get. There's a lot of potential things that we can do here. Some of them are process oriented. Some of them are applying optimization. So we actually did a cost benefit analysis as a way to mitigate that risk. So here's a cost benefit analysis. Here's all the different things that you can do. Here's some estimates of what the values of them are. Some of them were simply about process. All they had to do was change a way an app worked and they would get some value. Without us doing optimization. In fact, and they didn't, and in fact, in this case, they didn't go forward. We had proposed a project that would also do optimization, and they didn't choose to go forward. And the reason was of number 9, are there initiatives? So we actually met up. I mean, this was a firm, they were owned by private equity. I went with our COO at the time, met with the investors, and they had another initiative on the docket. And they basically said, look, we think the CEO of the company was totally behind it. He wanted to implement. But the PE firm said, no, we think this thing is more important. Well, that's it. We didn't do a project. right? We did our CBA, we did our cost benefit analysis, but we didn't get to go out and do any of the other things that we had proposed to them. And that was simply that other initiatives was the risk, which is one, interestingly enough, we can't control for, right? If we're into a company, we can understand how these other initiatives may be intersecting with what we're trying to do, but creates potential risk, but we have to understand it. I mean, another interesting example of this firm I mentioned earlier, where we used it ahead of time and they were doing the scheduling. When we did the proposal, they had an existing set of systems that were collecting data that we would use for the scheduling system. So, we make our proposal, we go forward. We're about, 6-7 months into the project, and they say, oh, by the way, we're changing that system. We're moving from our internally developed systems to starting to use Salesforce. Can you build a connection for your optimizer to get data from Salesforce? We said, sure. Here's a work order for that. We'll do that work. We do the connections. It gets tested. We're about a year into the project. It's all tested. It's all working. Next step was deployment. Well, this was in 2021. That deployment has just started earlier. I would say no, it was in the fall of 24. Why? The project to get Salesforce implemented, which they thought was going to be done in late 2021, really didn't finish until mid 2024. We didn't know that at the beginning, right? That wasn't something they exposed to us that we knew about. And so we mitigated the risk by implementing something that was a connector. And then we kind of waited around and did some other things while we waited for them to have that system in place so that they can get to a deployment phase.
Perfect. You mentioned process 2 in there. Let's go to T10, which was your technical 10, which was process maturity. So this one, I have to ask a deeper question. I was expecting a whole category for ongoing maintenance of a solution. Optimization solutions need to be maintained. Data science ones for sure. Machine learning, you have to worry about drift. Can you speak a little bit about that? How much you look at that? Is the organization going to be able to maintain the solution that you leave behind? How
we
do you factor that in?
We do, and I think we kind of do it in the context of, it relates to maturity in a way, I would say. But what we look at for maturity is, have they done things with taking a decision support system based on AI optimization, pick your technique, right? And, are they highly experienced and successful with the deployment and the long-term support for that area? So if they're in good shape, that's great. Well, maybe they've done it before in some business areas, but not in the particular one we're looking at. Or maybe they've done some pilots, but they have no idea what deployment means. And deployment really consists, in our minds, of two parts. One part is the technical aspect. You're standing up an application, and it's maybe going to be on the cloud and connects to data and has security and all of those aspects of deployment technically. But the other part of deployment comes into play with respect to deploying into the business, which means that you're going to create this set of tools that they're going to use to start making decisions. And are they ready to handle the change that's going to be involved in the business processes due to this new system being in place? And that kind of bit ties back to one of our environmental factors, which is decision support culture. Are they thinking about how the system will affect the way they're going to make decisions? If you're in places where people have been making decisions on spreadsheets, I'll give the example of somebody scheduling on a spreadsheet and taking a week to do it, and now you're doing it in an automated way. And so now if you had, 15 people that were making these schedules and now one person can do it in a day, what's going to happen to these other people? What are their jobs? How are their jobs going to change? Do you have to have, or the other example I like to use is if, let's say you're coming up with a workforce schedule and you can show that they can do all that work with 50 less people, you have to start talking to the management and maybe the HR department about, you may have to figure out a way of what you're going to do with these 50 people. So the process maturity is that connection about the technical aspect of building a production AI system, but also understanding how you're going to support the business with that system now being in place.
Yeah, I'd like to drill down on that one just a little bit, Irv, which kind of brings us back to the environmental column. In a way, you talk about projects or initiatives where either prior to the project in kind of doing the risk assessment or during the project, it became clear that there was a last mile problem between what the model produced and what actually was needed to make a decision.
I'm not sure we have that experience because we're pretty good about planning that up front, right? I mean, some of it one of the reasons is, and let me speak with respect to optimization because it's where my expertise is. One of the things that we do, and Patricia Randall, my colleague here at Princeton, talks about this a lot, is doing agile for optimization. So what we try to do is collect the requirements, and in consulting you typically have to write the requirements out in a statement of work, but we say it's going to be agile because new things may come up. So what will happen is we'll say we're going to implement this set of decisions and constraints and what have you with your data, but not everything. And we show them and give them a user interface and let them see the decisions that are being made to make sure that we're not getting caught further downstream by just saying, let's build everything and anything, walk away for 4 months, and here's your model. It's typically we try to do like 3-week sprints because optimization takes a little bit longer. Yeah. Do a 3-week sprint, come up with something that does part of the problem. Is this acceptable? Do these things make sense? And they said, well, yeah, what about this constraint? No, we told you that's in our next sprint. Okay, the next sprint, okay, do the same thing. And so by using an agile process, we're able to make sure that what we have at the end is going to create the decisions that they want to see and that they're acceptable decisions. We really try to avoid the way we're taught in school, frankly, which is go out, look at the problem, build a huge model, get all your data, walk away for 4 months and come back later. That just doesn't work in the consulting world. The other thing that we will do is we avoid black box optimization up front. So what that means is we talk about human in the loop optimization. So we're going to build a system where the user can interact with the user interface and understand what are the solutions and what's happening if they change this data and change that data. It may or may not become the final user interface, but it allows us to experiment with like, hey, if we change this value, is our model still working, et cetera. But that aspect of having the human in the loop and making sure that they see everything allows us to eventually get to the black box, if that's what's needed for the application. Because some of the applications are, hey, you're always better off having people review the decisions and say, yeah, this makes sense. I'll accept it. I'll push a button and push out the decision, than to just do it behind without having that review. Eventually they get to a process where they're doing the review and they're saying, oh, everything looks great. Go, go, go. And if we start measuring that, we're then able to then move over to that black box. And so that's usually the path that we take. There's others. We did work with one company that, they had already built out their optimization. They're optimizing, it was an e-commerce, what orders to send to which distribution centers. So every 5 minutes they run this application. They had built all the infrastructure for it. They had built a whole bunch of monitoring for it. So one of the reasons they came to us is said, occasionally we're getting some odd answers and we can pick that up from our monitoring. What do we do about it? And so it wasn't about human in the loop. The humans, because of the velocity of the business, you really don't have a human in the loop. The question is how can we mitigate these times where we're not getting the kinds of performance and decisions that we want? What do we do about it? So, hey, you can make your model better here, et cetera, to make it more robust and reliable in the context of that black box.
Yeah. So I would imagine the human in the loop, this is an interesting idea because you have to invest a little bit more to make that interface up front so that they can interact with it. But I'm guessing you just learn a ton on the back end. When they interact with it, they're telling
Absolutely.
you things they didn't tell before. They didn't even know themselves before. And is that the big benefit of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And you say invest a lot now. There's some tools out there where we can create, if in the optimization world, once we got one big part is getting the data.
Okay.
Right. So our first part of the project is we've pulled in the data, we show it to them on a screen, and building that user interface has become a lot easier. We have some tools that are open source that we use to do that. And I can have somebody who doesn't know optimization build that stuff, put everything in a bunch of pandas data frames. We can generate a user interface in a day. And so by doing that, we first verify, are we pulling in the data correctly, right? Did we get everything that you think is in your systems into our system? That's first step in that agile process. Yep. Once we have that, now it's just a matter of having an optimization button. And then after the optimization, they click that button, you get a solution, you put it into the screen, right? So the investment in building that UI the cost of it has come way, way, way down because of some of these tools that we use.
I know you Irv pretty well, and I know that you like nothing more than to work on big problems that would help transform a company, have a significant impact. Do you think the Princeton 20, does it make you or your clients more risk averse, or does it actually make them take on a bigger, riskier project because the risk? What side does it weigh on, or do you have any insight on that?
I think it's really hard to say whether, I think it's the perspective or what we hear is that the fact that we've been very upfront about it means they feel more comfortable in going forward, right? At the same time, let's suppose I go through all 20 factors and everything looks great, okay? Then we're basically saying there's a high probability of success. So it's in consulting, and this, Mike, yep, and Vijay from your careers, it's a relationship-based business. So you're trying to establish confidence with the client that you can do the work. And so if you are upfront about the risks, they're like, hey, wait, you know what? These guys are smart. They know about that. And if we've identified it and we've identified what needs to be done to mitigate those risks, and at the same time, if we come back and we evaluate and everything looks great, they're like, wow, we're ready for this, right? Then our questions are, how much is it going to cost? And, and how long is it going to take to implement? So, I think in some sense, I don't think it's making them take more risk-averse projects. In fact, I think there would be cases, I don't think it's occurred yet, where if we found a project where we evaluated these factors and let's say 60% or maybe even 50% of them were showing high risk, we might question whether we want to do it, because if now we're saying here are the risks and you don't want to pay for us to mitigate those risks, that means the risk has fallen on us.
Right.
Right. And therefore we have to price it accordingly, and we probably will lose it because sometimes they may not believe that the risk is there, even though we know it well. It is there. And then we see, we'll say, well, okay, great. If you don't choose us, we're pretty confident that we're right. I mean, you have to be in this world, right? All of a sudden you'll hear the story. Sometimes I think it's occurred, where we've gotten the call back due to the failure of whoever they chose, and they say, okay, you guys were right. Let's work together.
Perfect.
And that's just the way business works.
It does. It's a long game in this consulting. And if you play it right, you get some of that stuff on the other side. But it's painful. You got to wait a long time for those to come back around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's I'm chair of this year's Edelman competition, and one of the entries has actually talked about that they've implemented a solution, and now, which is the one they're placing in the Edelman, but their paper talks about the fact that they had 2 earlier failures. They don't say why, which will be one of our questions coming from the judges, but is to understand, how did you go from a place where you had failed before to where you're successful now? Yeah. Right. And understanding that. So, I mentioned one of the things that happens here is, we learn from this. There are times where, our projects are pretty much always successful. There was one project I was involved in very early in my career here at Princeton that ended up not getting deployed, and we didn't have the Princeton 20 at that time. But if we look back, one of the things actually that probably came into play was what was the thing that created the problem, which we should have been more aware of at the time. And I was new to our practice here within Princeton, so was the risk related to decision data. It turned out we had identified you don't have this data. in order to be able to do the things you want to do. So they actually built something to start collecting that data, but it turned out that so they built it all without consulting us how it should be built so that it would make sense for what we were going to be optimizing. That was a mistake.
Yep.
Mutual probably, but we'll take the blame for not being on top of that. But secondly, what happened was once they had collected it, once they were trying to start collecting it, they found that because of their design that it was difficult to collect. Right. So that all of a sudden meant we couldn't do the optimization. Well, so that becomes a failure. So we learned from that. And now we said, you know what? We got to be more on top of understanding decision data and what's going on. And it relates to other initiatives because this other initiative was happening for them to collect data, but we weren't on top of it as much as we should have been.
Last question, Irv. We really appreciate your time. We're looking for a book, a podcast, a presentation that you've encountered recently that's really stuck with you that you'd like to share with our audience.
I will mention two things that I've seen that I thought are interesting. So one is there's a book called Leading in Analytics by Joseph Krazier, and he uses it to teach one of the certification prep courses. And what I like about the book is what he did is he based it upon the previous job task analysis, these 7 domains I mentioned earlier, and talking about, how you have to be aware, what do you have to do to be successful in creating projects? Now, one of the challenges in the book is that it has multiple audiences, and he flips sometimes from page to page in which audience, which is you're a data scientist, you're on the ground doing all the work with the data, to somebody who's managing an analytics or data function, to the business exec who needs to understand value. So what's good from a reference is that, I can suggest to people if they want to understand how analytics projects become successful, it's a useful book from that perspective and some of the things that you have to be aware of for that success. The second one, you mentioned a presentation, which I thought is interesting, relates to Gen AI. So first of all, I'm a cynic about Gen AI. I will totally admit I have my big concerns about it. There's a lot of risk. It gives wrong answers, etc. It's moving at a breakneck pace. It's almost hard to keep up. Having said that, I saw an interesting application that was talked about from some folks from Microsoft. And what they did is, so the problem that they were solving was how to procure the servers for the data centers for Azure, their cloud framework. So what they had previously is somebody would be making decisions on a spreadsheet. Let's order 50 servers and ship them here, and 40 servers and ship them there, and 30 servers and ship them over here. So the team builds out an optimization application to help them figure this out. So they built this optimization application, and what they did is the users would come back and say, well, why did you ship 40 over here instead of 50? So they said, let's build a Gen AI application as part of this where the user can type that question, and we'll create a scenario and solve that scenario and show them what the answer would have been. And look, if you had done this, here's how your KPIs would have changed, right? So it was a nice application at Gen AI. They reported at the time I saw the presentation a few months ago, about 60 to 70% of the questions they were able to handle right up front. And for the other ones that they can't handle, which they will admit right up front to the user, I don't know how to answer this question, they send it back to the team, who then figures out how to take that question and create a scenario so that it'll work the next time. And that starts increasing the percent of questions they can handle. So this idea of using, an interactive framework based on Gen AI in a limited domain really made it work really well. And I thought that was kind of an interesting application. And I think when we start seeing, these applications, especially in our arena of optimization, where people start doing things in these very well-defined domains where you can draw a box around it, I think that represents some great opportunity. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about these types of applications in the future.
You may hear some of that on our future podcast.
You won't listen.
You'll have to listen.
Exactly. Well, Irv, thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it. We learned a lot. As always, you're very articulate, so thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure talking to both of you.
Take care. Have a great day.
Cheers.